My name is Jeffrey Fogle. I reside at 215 Spruce Street here in the city. A lot of very important things have been said tonight, and I don't want to repeat them. One of the things I do want to mention is one of the essences of this movement is a recognition of the incredible disparity in wealth in this country. Perhaps no greater than ever in history, perhaps no greater than ever in history in any country in the world. One of the things that that disparity in wealth does is it skews our rights. We believe that we're all born with the same rights, but it's not true. If you have money, you control media. You control the means of communication. And we know you're probably going to control politicians as well in this country. So that we know that the parties have been controlled by money. We know that the media of communication has been controlled by money. So where does that leave people without money in exercising the fundamental rights that presumably all of you agree with? It leads them with a position where they have to exercise those rights in a manner that does not comport with the rich, but comports with the poor. And that's precisely what's going on here. So if you wish to recognize the underlying principles of equality and freedom in this country, there's only one way to do that, and that's to allow Occupy Charlottesville to continue.
Yes, sir.
In 1968, when he was assassinated, Martin Luther King was organizing the Poor People's March. And what the intention was to bring poor people to Washington, D.C., erect tents, and to keep those tents up in the National Mall until the National Congress did something about the problem of poverty in America. Well, the National Congress did nothing about poverty in America. Unfortunately, no other body has done anything about poverty in America either. But the point is, think about yourselves. Had you been sitting on the National Park Commission or the D.C. City Council at the time that Martin Luther King announced that Poor People's March, would you have decided, no, we're not going to allow people with tents here on the National Mall? Tents, by the way, that you've already ordered people in Occupy Charlottesville to tear down. Those were the tents. And in fact, tents were erected on the National Mall and were allowed there, I believe, for about 3 months without incident and without problem. Now, there'll be people who tell you, perhaps it's your attorney who's going to tell you, that the courts have upheld the power, not the right, but rather the power of governmental entities to prohibit people from sleeping in public spaces. Well, we all know what the First Amendment says. Congress, or in this case, no governmental entity shall make a law abridging the freedom of speech or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Well, if you say you can't assemble after 11, you're abridging the right to peaceably assemble. If you say you can't be somebody, you're abridging the right to peaceably speak. Now, how did this come about? Well, it came about only because the Supreme Court decided that they wanted to give the power to municipalities and other governmental entities to control people. But that doesn't mean that it's right. And it doesn't mean that it's the right interpretation of the First Amendment. Don't forget about the fact that even after a civil war in this country, after the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, we still had a Supreme Court who said separate was fine. Notwithstanding the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, it was okay to separate power. People on the basis of race, and we had a system of apartheid in this country. So you cannot rely on the Supreme Court's definition of what the First Amendment is to know what the true meaning of the First Amendment is. And in any event, by the way, the First Amendment and the rest of the constitutional provisions are the bottom line. Congress shall make no law. That's the bottom line. Congress could be much more expansive, as could this body be, much more expansive in the granting of rights and liberties than has happened in this country so far. And after all, it's only been about 300 years. You would think that we might have advanced as a civilization somewhat in those 300 years. I mean, it's sad to hear people talking about the so-called unintended consequences. It sounds like people would like to control the homeless, dictate what food they ate, dictate how they acted. Well, you know we have a place for that. We call it prison, unfortunately. And many of the people who are in prison are in that situation through no fault of their own.
Mr. Fogle, if you can wrap up your comments, please.
Yes, I will. I'm going to finish right now. It is amazing when you think about people exercising what everybody considers the most cherished right in this country, and that's the right to free speech, and that you can turn that off with a turn of the dial. That in one moment it's free speech, and in the next moment you're going to call it a crime. But what I'm going to ask you to do is think about the fact. Take responsibility. If you decide that you're not going to allow the people to remain in Occupy Charlottesville past Thanksgiving, remember that you will be responsible for an act of governmental violence. Because when the police go in to physically remove people, that is an act of violence. Now, they're doing so at the behest of the council. They're doing so with lawful justification, but it is an act of violence. And if you do so, each of you, each and every one of you, should take responsibility for that act of violence. Thank you very much.